I was under the hood of a Chevy Silverado when Danny called my name from the front office. "Two people were asking for me," he said. I wiped the grease off my hands and walked out to find a man and woman standing near the counter, both looking weathered and older than their years should suggest. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, and tears immediately started streaming down her face. She stepped forward, reaching out like she wanted to embrace me. The man beside her looked equally emotional, his jaw trembling. The woman choked out the words, "Our boy, our precious boy," and reached for my face. Danny glanced between us, confused. "Do you know these folks?" he asked me. I stared at them both for a long moment, taking in every detail of their desperate expressions. Then I spoke clearly and coldly. "Never seen these people before in my life. Please leave my shop, or I will call the police." The man's face crumbled like paper. They were my parents. They had abandoned me 10 years ago. I felt absolutely nothing. Danny looked at me with concern as the woman continued sobbing. The man tried to speak, his voice breaking. "Rich, please, it's us. It's Mom and Dad." I kept my expression blank, reaching for my phone in my pocket. "I am going to count to 10, I said. "If you are not out of this building by then, the police will remove you." The woman let out a wail that made the few customers in the waiting area turn and stare. Danny, bless him, gently took the woman by the elbow and guided both of them toward the door. The man kept looking back at me, his eyes pleading, but I had already turned away and walked back into the garage. After they left, Danny came back looking troubled. "Boss, what was that about?" he asked. I told him they were probably running some kind of scam, pretending to be people's relatives to get money. "Happens more than you'd think." Danny nodded slowly, but I could tell he did not entirely believe me. I went back to work on the Silverado, my hands shaking so badly I had to set down my wrench. The truth was more complicated than any scam. 10 years ago, when I was 18 and finishing my senior year at Lincoln High School in our small Ohio town, my life had been completely ordinary. I had a younger sister named Emma, who was 10 years old. We were not particularly close because of the age gap, but she was a sweet kid who loved drawing and always wanted to tag along with me and my friends. Then one January evening, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table with expressions I had never seen before. Emma had been diagnosed with something rare, something degenerative that was attacking her nervous system. The doctors in Ohio said there was nothing they could do. But there was an experimental treatment program in Switzerland that might save her life. I remember my father, Gerald, explaining it all in this flat, emotionless voice. The treatment would take years. It would cost everything we had and more. They would need to sell the house, liquidate all their savings, max out every line of credit. And they would need to be there with Emma full-time, because the protocol required constant parental supervision and decision-making. I asked the obvious question, what about me? What about school? What about college? I had been accepted to Ohio State with a partial scholarship. I was supposed to start in the fall. My mother, Diane, reached across the table and patted my hand. "You are 18 now," she said. "You are old enough to handle yourself. You are practically an adult. We have arranged for you to stay with Uncle Jerry until you get on your feet. It will only be for a little while. Once Emma is stable, we will figure everything out." Uncle Jerry was my father's younger brother, a man who worked night shifts at a packaging warehouse and spent his days drinking cheap beer in front of a television in his trailer at Meadowview Mobile Home Park on the edge of town. I had met him maybe 5 times in my entire life, but none of that seemed to matter to my parents. Within 3 weeks, the house was sold. All of our furniture was either sold or put into a storage unit that my parents eventually stopped paying for. My childhood home, my room, every familiar thing disappeared like smoke. They dropped me off at Jerry's trailer on a cold February afternoon with 2 duffel bags containing my clothes and a box of personal items. Emma was already too sick to come along. I never got to say goodbye to her properly. My mother hugged me quickly and told me to be strong. My father shook my hand like I was a business associate. Then they drove away to catch their flight to Zurich, and I stood in the gravel driveway of a rusted trailer, completely alone. Uncle Jerry was not a bad man, exactly. He was just checked out of life. He worked, he drank, he slept. He gave me a corner of the living room where I put down a thin mattress I bought from Goodwill, with the $200 my parents had left me. There was no privacy, no door, no space that was mine. Jerry was gone most nights for his warehouse shift, and during the day, he was either passed out or watching game shows, with the volume turned up too loud. The trailer always smelled like stale beer and cigarette smoke, even though Jerry smoked outside. There was never enough food. Jerry bought enough groceries for himself and seemed to forget I existed. I got a job at the Gas and Go on Highway 42, working evening shifts for minimum wage. I bought my own food, kept it in a separate corner of the fridge that Jerry mostly respected. I finished high school by sheer force of will, waking up on that mattress every morning and walking 2 miles to school because Jerry's truck was always at the warehouse and I had no car. I missed all the college application deadlines. Nobody helped me figure out financial aid or housing or any of it. My guidance counselor asked about my plans once, and I told her I was taking a gap year. The truth was, I had no plans. I had no future. I was just surviving day to day. My parents called twice in those first 10 years. The first time was 6 months after they left. My mother's voice on the phone sounded distant and distracted. She told me Emma was responding well to the treatment. They were hopeful. She asked how I was doing. But before I could answer with anything real, she said she had to go because they had a meeting with Emma's doctors. She told me she loved me and hung up. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. The second call came 3 years later. My father this time. Even more brief. Treatment was ongoing. Emma was stable. They would be in touch. Then nothing. 7 years of absolute silence. I worked at the Gas and Go for 2 years, saved every penny. Then I got a job at Curtis Auto Repair, a small shop downtown run by an older man named Curtis who saw something in me. He taught me everything about fixing cars. I was good at it. I understood engines and systems and problems. Curtis was patient and kind, in a gruff way. He became more of a father to me in 2 years than Gerald had been in 18. When I was 21, I finally moved out of Jerry's trailer into a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. It was 400 square feet, and the water pressure was terrible, but it was mine. I kept working for Curtis, learning everything I could. When I was 25, Curtis decided to retire and move to Florida to be near his daughter. He offered to sell me the shop for a price I could barely afford, but he agreed to owner financing with payments I could manage. I became a business owner. By the time I was 28, I had built something real. The shop was doing well. I had bought a small 2-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. I had a girlfriend named Jenna, who was smart and funny, and worked as a dental hygienist at the clinic across town. My life was not perfect, but it was stable. It was mine. I had built it with my own hands from absolutely nothing, and I had not heard from my parents in 7 years. Now I stood in my garage, staring at the Silverado's engine block, and all I could feel was the trembling rage that came from seeing their faces again. I closed the shop an hour early, told Danny I was not feeling well. I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing. When I pulled into my driveway, my heart stopped. They were sitting on my front porch steps, waiting for me. Diane jumped up as I got out of my truck. "Rich, please," she said, rushing toward me. "Just give us 5 minutes. Just listen." I held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks. "You have 60 seconds before I call the police," I said. "Start talking." Gerald stood up slowly, looking older and more broken than he had at the shop. His voice was hoarse. "Emma died 3 months ago. We came back because we have nowhere else to go. We lost everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma was dead. My little sister was dead, and I had not even known she was dying. I stood frozen in my driveway, keys still in my hand, trying to process what Gerald had just said. Emma was dead. The little girl I barely remembered The child my parents had abandoned me for was gone. Diane collapsed onto the porch steps, her sobs echoing through the quiet neighborhood. I could see curtains moving in windows across the street. Mrs. Patterson from next door was definitely watching. This was exactly the kind of scene I hated. Against every instinct screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive away, I unlocked my front door. Inside, I said, "You have 10 minutes. Not 60. 10. They followed me in like beaten dogs, their shoulders hunched and their movements slow. Once inside, they looked around my modest home with expressions I could not quite read. Pride, maybe, or shame. Probably both. My house was clean and simply furnished. I had a comfortable couch, a decent television, a kitchen table I had built myself from reclaimed wood. It was not much, but it was 1,000 times better than that mattress on Jerry's floor. "Sit," I told them, pointing to the couch. I remained standing, arms crossed, every muscle in my body tense. "Talk." Gerald cleared his throat several times before he could start. Emma's treatment failed after 9 years. The experimental protocol just stopped working. She deteriorated quickly at the end. She died in a hospital in Zurich. He paused, rubbing his face with both hands. We spent every dollar we had. More than we had. We went into debt we can never repay. Lost our apartment there. We have no savings, no credit, nothing. A church charity bought us one-way tickets back to the States. We have nowhere to go. I stared at him, feeling nothing but cold anger. "And you thought you would come here?" Diane looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "You are our son. You are all we have left." The statement was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that I actually laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "I am all you have left. That is rich. Where was I for 10 years? Where was I when you decided I was old enough to handle myself at 18? Where was I when you stopped calling?" "We thought you understood," Diane said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "We thought you would understand that family comes first, that your sister needed us more than you did. You were an adult. She was a dying child." The guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach. She was right, was she not? Emma had been sick and dying. What kind of monster resents that? But another part of me, the part that had survived on the floor of Jerry's trailer, knew this was manipulation. I opened my mouth to respond when I heard a key in the front door. Jenna. She walked in carrying takeout bags from the Chinese place we both loved, already talking. "I got extra spring rolls because I know you have been stressed." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw my parents on the couch. Her expression shifted immediately from warm to guarded. "Who are these people?" "Jenna," I said quietly. "These are my parents." Her eyes went wide. She knew the whole story. She knew what they had done. She set the takeout bags on the kitchen counter with deliberate care, then turned to face them. Her voice was ice. "You must be the wonderful people who abandoned Rich when he was 18 and never looked back." Diane stood up, attempting a warm smile that looked more like a grimace. "You must be the wonderful girl taking care of our son." Jenna's eyes flashed. "I am his partner, not his caretaker, and he has taken care of himself just fine without you." She turned to me. "Rich, can I talk to you in the kitchen?" We stepped into the kitchen, and Jenna kept her voice low but urgent. "What are they doing here? Why did you let them in?" I explained about Emma, about them having nowhere to go. Jenna's expression softened slightly at the news about Emma, but her jaw remained tight. "Rich, I am so sorry about your sister, but you realize this is a trap. They want something from you." "I know," I said. "I just need to figure out what to do." "You tell them to leave," Jenna said. "Tonight. You call them a cab, you give them money for a motel, and you never let them back in." Before I could respond, Gerald appeared in the kitchen doorway. I could not help but overhear. "We understand this is difficult. We are not asking for much, just a place to stay for a few nights, while we figure out our next steps. We have applications out for jobs, for housing assistance. We just need a little time." Jenna looked at me with an expression that clearly said, "Do not do this." But I was already drowning in guilt and confusion. I heard myself saying, 3 days. You can stay 3 days. Then you need to have a plan. Gerald nodded quickly. 3 days. That is more than fair. Thank you, son. Jenna grabbed her purse off the counter. I am going to my sister's place tonight. Call me when they are gone. She walked out without another word. I heard her car start and drive away, and I felt the first crack in the life I had built so carefully. That night, I lay in my own bed while my parents slept in the guest room down the hall. The house felt wrong, invaded. I could not sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard voices through the wall. Low murmuring. I got up quietly and pressed my ear against the shared wall between my room and the guest room. Diane's voice. Whisper. Soft, but clear. See? I told you the guilt angle would work. He is soft. We can stretch this out for months until we get back on our feet. We just have to keep playing the grieving parents card. Gerald's response made my blood turn to ice. Just do not push too hard, too fast. We need him to think this was his idea. If he feels forced, he will kick us out. But if we make him feel like he is choosing to help us, like it is his moral duty, we can stay as long as we need. I stood there in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it through the wall. They were manipulating me. Deliberately, calculatedly. This was a game to them, and I was the mark. I got back into bed and stared at the ceiling until dawn, rage building inside me like a pressure cooker. When morning came, I confronted them at the breakfast table. I heard you last night, through the wall. I heard what you said about manipulating me. They both looked genuinely shocked, which almost made me believe them for a second. Then Diane's face crumpled. Rich, you must have misunderstood. I was upset. I was talking about my grief, about Emma. I say confused things when I am grieving. Gerald jumped in immediately. You are looking for excuses to abandon your own parents. You want to be the victim so badly that you are twisting our words. The accusation stung because it was such a perfect reversal. Suddenly, I was the bad guy for questioning them. I was the one abandoning people. I felt my certainty waver. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe grief was making Diane say strange things. But deep in my gut, I knew what I had heard. The 3 days passed. On the morning of day 4, I told them it was time to make arrangements to leave. That was when Diane had her medical episode. Diane was loading the dishwasher after breakfast, when she suddenly grabbed her chest and gasped. She stumbled backward, her face contorting in pain. Gerald rushed to her side, catching her before she fell. Rich, call 911. She is having a heart attack. I called the ambulance, my hands shaking despite my anger. Part of me wondered if this was another manipulation, but I could not risk being wrong. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They checked her vitals, asked questions, loaded her onto a stretcher. Gerald rode with her in the ambulance. I followed in my truck, my mind spinning. At the hospital, doctors ran tests for hours. I sat in the waiting room, texting updates to Jenna, who responded with short, worried messages. Finally, a doctor came out and explained that Diane had experienced an anxiety attack, not a cardiac event. Her heart was fine. She was stressed and needed rest and a stable environment. They were prescribing medication for anxiety and recommending follow-up with a primary care physician. When I went back to see her in the emergency room bay, Diane looked small and frail in the hospital bed. The doctor was telling her to avoid stressful situations, to take it easy. Gerald stood beside her, holding her hand, and when the doctor left, he turned to me. You heard what he said. She needs a stable home environment. No stress. You would not kick out your sick mother, would you? I wanted to scream. Instead, I said nothing. I drove them back to my house and watched them settle back into the guest room like they had never been asked to leave. That was when things really started to change. Over the next 2 weeks, my parents began taking over my house and my life in small, insidious ways. Diane started rearranging my kitchen, claiming she was making it more efficient. I would come home to find all my dishes and utensils in different cabinets. My grocery shopping patterns were criticized. I was buying the wrong brands, the unhealthy options. She started making shopping lists for me. Gerald began commenting on how I ran my business. "You are undercharging customers," he said one evening. "I looked at your books. You could be making twice what you make if you just had better business sense." The fact that he had looked at my business records without permission did not seem to register as a violation to him. They ate my food without asking, left lights on all over the house, took long showers that drained my hot water heater. Gerald made long-distance calls on my landline to people I did not know, racking up charges. When I confronted him, he said he was calling about job opportunities. He needed to network. Surely I understood that. The worst part was how they inserted themselves into my relationship with Jenna. She had started coming back around, trying to be supportive despite her reservations. But every time she came over, Diane found ways to criticize her. "That is an interesting outfit choice. Very bold." Or, "You work as a dental hygienist. That must be nice. Not as demanding as a real nurse." Jenna would squeeze my hand under the table, keeping her composure, but I could feel her pulling away from me, emotionally, with each visit. Then the money requests started. Gerald asked to borrow $300 for job interview clothes. He needed a decent suit, he said. He had interviews lined up. This was an investment in getting out of my hair. I reluctantly wrote him a check. A week later, I found a receipt in the trash can. Valley View Casino, $285 in slot machine credits. I confronted him, holding the receipt up. "I was trying to win money to pay you back faster," he said without a trace of shame. I almost hit jackpot. I was so close. Diane immediately jumped to his defense. "He is desperate, Rich. You have no idea what we have been through. Watching your child die destroys you. It makes you do irrational things. Have some compassion." The guilt they wielded was like a weapon, and I had no defense against it. I backed down. I always back down. Jenna finally reached her breaking point 2 days later. She came over for dinner, and Diane spent the entire meal making passive-aggressive comments about the casserole Jenna had brought. After dinner, Jenna asked to speak with me outside. We stood on the front porch in the cold November air, and she said the words I had been dreading. "It is them or me, Rich. I cannot watch them destroy you anymore. You are not sleeping. You have lost weight. You are miserable in your own home, and you will not do anything about it." I begged her to be patient just a little longer. "I will figure it out. I just need time to find them a place to go." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You have had time. They have been here for 5 weeks now. 5 weeks of watching them manipulate you, guilt you, use you. I love you, but I cannot be part of this. I am going to stay with my sister for a while. To think." She left, and I did not try to stop her because I knew she was right. I was letting them destroy everything I had built, but I did not know how to make them leave. A few days later, I came home early from the shop. I had closed for the afternoon because we were slow, and I needed to catch up on paperwork. I walked into my house and heard voices coming from my home office. I moved quietly down the hall and pushed open the door to find my parents going through my filing cabinet. Gerald had files spread across my desk. Diane was taking pictures of documents with her phone. Bank statements, tax returns, property deed, insurance policies. "What are you doing?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. They both turned, startled but not guilty. Gerald straightened up, completely casual. "We are your parents. We have a right to know what resources are available for the family. We need to understand your financial situation so we can plan appropriately." "You are photographing my private documents," I said. Diane slipped her phone into her pocket. "We are trying to help you, Rich. You are not financially literate. We can see that from these statements. You need guidance. Get out of my office," I said. Now, they left, but the damage was done. That night, unable to sleep, I checked my credit report online. My hands went numb as I scrolled through the report. 2 credit card applications in my name from the past month. Both denied due to verification issues, but the hard inquiries were there. Someone had tried to open credit in my name using my social security number. The applications had been submitted online from my home IP address. I printed the credit report and walked down the hall to the guest room. I threw open the door without knocking. My parents were both awake, sitting up in bed. I turned on the light and held up the papers. "Identity theft," I said. "You tried to open credit cards in my name." Gerald did not even try to look innocent. "We needed funds, Rich. You were not helping us adequately. We have rights as your parents." That was when I realized they were not just mooching. They were not just manipulating. They were actively trying to steal from me, and they felt entitled to do it. "Get out," I said. "Get out of my house right now, or I am calling the police." Gerald's expression changed. It hardened. The mask of the pitiful father fell away, and something cold and calculating emerged. "You call the cops on your own parents, after we sacrificed everything for your sister. Go ahead. See how that plays out for you in this town." I pulled out my phone and started dialing. Gerald stood up slowly. "Do you even know your rights, son? We have been living here for more than 30 days. We are legal tenants. You cannot just kick us out. You have to evict us properly. That takes time. Months." We looked it up. My finger froze over the call button. He was right. I had looked into tenant laws years ago when Curtis was dealing with a problematic renter in one of his properties. In Ohio, anyone who stays in your home for more than 30 days establishes tenancy. You have to go through formal eviction proceedings. You cannot just lock them out or force them to leave. Gerald saw the realization on my face and smiled. "So put down the phone. We are not going anywhere." The next morning, I called a lawyer. I found Phil Martinez through a referral from Curtis, who still called me every few months from Florida to check in. Phil's office was in a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a nail salon. He was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much human ugliness. I laid out the entire situation for him. The abandonment 10 years ago, my parents showing up, the manipulation, the identity theft attempts, the fact that they were now refusing to leave. Phil listened carefully, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Okay. The good news is you have grounds for eviction. The bad news is it is going to take time. In Ohio, you have to provide written notice, 30 days minimum. If they do not leave after that, you file for eviction with the court. Then there is a hearing. If you win, which you will given the circumstances, the court issues an order. Then a bailiff physically removes them. The whole process takes 60 to 90 days under the best circumstances." 90 days, I repeated. 3 more months of this. Phil nodded. "As for the identity theft, that is a separate criminal matter. You can file a police report. I recommend you do, but I have to warn you, pressing charges against your parents is going to get messy. Small town like this, people talk. Media might pick it up. Estranged son has parents arrested. It will not play well for you publicly, even if you are 100% in the right." "I do not care how it plays," I said. "They tried to steal my identity." "I understand," Phil said. "I am just preparing you for the reality. But yes, file the report. It creates a paper trail. It shows a pattern of behavior. It strengthens your eviction case." I left his office feeling both relieved and overwhelmed. At least I had a plan now, a legal path forward. I filed the police report that afternoon. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, but clearly uncomfortable with the family drama aspect of it. The applications were denied, so no actual fraud occurred, he explained. But we will investigate. Realistically, though, even if we determine your parents submitted those applications, the DA probably will not prosecute. It is a family matter. Everything was a family matter. That was the problem. The word family was being used as a shield for abuse and theft. I served my parents with a formal 30-day eviction notice that evening. Gerald read it calmly, folded it up, and handed it back to me. "We are not leaving," he said. "See you in court." But they did not just sit quietly for 30 days. They went on the offensive. Over the next 2 weeks, my parents started telling their version of events to everyone who would listen. At the grocery store, Diane would run into neighbors and tell them how her heartless son was trying to throw his grieving parents out on the street after they spent 10 years caring for his dying sister. At the diner downtown, Gerald would sit at the counter and talk loudly about ungrateful children who forget where they came from. My mother even started volunteering at St. Mark's Church, the small Lutheran church on Maple Street that I had attended sporadically over the years. She told the congregation she was new in town, caring for her son who had emotional problems. The pastor's wife, Helen, who had always been kind to me, gave me a troubled look the next time I ran into her at the hardware store. The gossip spread like wildfire. In a town of 8,000 people, everyone knew everyone's business. Suddenly, longtime customers at my shop were asking uncomfortable questions. "Everything okay with your folks, Rich? Heard they are staying with you. That must be nice, having family close." One morning, I arrived at the shop to find someone had spray-painted "Family Hater" in bright red letters across the back wall. Danny and I spent 3 hours scrubbing it off. Danny did not ask questions, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Business started to suffer. Some of my regulars stopped coming in. Mrs. Chen, who had been bringing me her Honda Accord for 5 years, took it to the dealership in the next town over instead. Mr. Thompson, who owned the feed store, canceled his appointment for an oil change without explanation. My revenue dropped by 20% in 2 weeks. The community's judgment was suffocating. I was being painted as the villain in a story I had not written. My parents were the sympathetic characters, the grieving mother and father who had sacrificed everything, now being rejected by their cruel son. Then Jenna came back, not to reconcile, but to collect her belongings. She still had a key to my house, and she let herself in on a Saturday afternoon when I was at the shop. When I came home, she was packing her things into boxes: clothes from the closet, toiletries from the bathroom, the framed photo of us from our trip to Chicago last summer. "Jenna, wait," I said. "Please." She did not look at me. "I love you, Rich. I really do. But I cannot be with you while this is happening. You need to fix this, and I do not think you can while I am here. I have become a target for them. They use me to hurt you. It is better if I am gone." "I will fix it," I said. "I have a lawyer. I am evicting them. It is just going to take time." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were full of sadness. "You have been saying that for weeks. Meanwhile, you are losing your business, your reputation, your health. Look at yourself, Rich. You have lost 20 pounds. You are not sleeping. This is killing you, and you are letting it happen." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Just throw them out and have them arrested. Deal with everyone in this town thinking I am a monster." She touched my face gently. "Yes, that is exactly what you are supposed to do, but I do not think you can, so I have to go." She left with her boxes, and I stood alone in the house that no longer felt like mine. That night, I checked my bank accounts obsessively, terrified of what else my parents might try. I discovered $500 missing from a savings account. I rarely checked. I reviewed the transaction history. The money had been withdrawn from an ATM 2 weeks ago. I never used that card. I kept it locked in my desk drawer for emergencies. Then I remembered. About 3 weeks ago, I had gone to the bank with my parents in the car. They needed to open an account, they said, to receive direct deposits for the jobs they were supposedly applying for. I had withdrawn cash from the ATM while they waited. Had they been watching? Had they memorized my PIN? I called the bank, but they said without proof someone else had used the card. There was not much they could do. Had I given anyone access to my PIN? Had I left the card unsecured? It was my word against the camera footage that just showed someone's hand entering a PIN at an ATM. Everything I had built was crumbling. My relationship was over. My business was suffering. My community had turned against me. My finances were being drained. And my parents sat in my guest room every night, eating my food, using my utilities, and plotting their next move. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a process server came to my shop. I was being sued. My parents had filed a lawsuit against me for elder financial abuse and unlawful eviction attempts. According to the complaint, I had promised to support them in their time of need, then reneged on that promise, and was now attempting to illegally force them out of their home. They were also filing for a restraining order against me, claiming I had threatened them with physical violence. I had never threatened them, never raised a hand, never even raised my voice beyond telling them to leave my office. But there it was, in legal documents, sworn statements from both Gerald and Diane describing a pattern of verbal abuse and threatening behavior. Their lawyer was a woman named Patricia Vance, who worked for a legal aid society. She had taken the case pro bono after my parents portrayed themselves as destitute elderly victims being abused by their wealthy son. The court date was set for 6 weeks away. In the meantime, a temporary order was issued. I could not force them to leave until the hearing. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my shop, holding the legal papers, and felt something inside me break. I had done everything right. I had survived being abandoned. I had built a life. I had been responsible and hardworking and decent. And I was being destroyed by the two people who should have protected me. I called Phil. He read through the complaint and swore under his breath. "This is bad, Rich. They are playing the legal system perfectly. Elder abuse claims get taken very seriously. The burden of proof is on you to show you did not abuse them, and their lawyer is good. She is making this about a vulnerable elderly couple versus their successful, ungrateful son." "What do I do?" I asked. "We fight," Phil said. "We gather evidence. We document everything. We build our case. And we pray the judge sees through their manipulation." That night, I could not go home. I could not face my parents sitting in my house, knowing they were suing me, knowing they were winning. I slept in my office at the shop, on the old couch I kept in the break room. Danny found me there in the morning, still in yesterday's clothes, and just brought me coffee without asking questions. I was losing everything, and I did not know how to stop it. The temporary court order changed everything. With legal protection, my parents became bolder. They stopped pretending to look for jobs or apartments. They stopped offering to help with household expenses. They acted like they owned my house, and legally, I could do nothing about it. Gerald started drinking the expensive whiskey I kept on a shelf in my den. Bottles that had cost me $60 or $70 each, gifts from customers over the years, special occasions. He would leave them empty on the coffee table like trash. When I said something, he laughed. "You have always been cheap, Rich. Learn to share." Diane went through my house and threw out things she decided were clutter. Family photos from my years with Jenna, books I had collected, a model car I had built with Curtis years ago. I found them in the trash and rescued what I could, but some things were already gone, taken out with the garbage. When I confronted her, she said she was helping me declutter. I was living like a bachelor. It was unhealthy. They took over the master bedroom. Just moved their things in one day while I was at work. When I came home, my clothes were in the guest room. Diane said the master had better light and a bigger closet. They needed it more than I did. They were older. They had health issues. I slept on the couch in my own house because I could not stand being in the guest room, feeling like a visitor in my own life. Business continued to decline. The online reviews started appearing. 1-star ratings on Google and Yelp. Owner is abusing his elderly parents. Do not give this man your money. He does not deserve your business. Support family values. Go somewhere else. The reviews were anonymous, but I knew where they were coming from. Some of them used phrases identical to things my parents had said. I had to cut Danny back to part-time hours. He was understanding, but I knew he was worried about his bills. He had a kid and a wife who was pregnant with their second. I felt like I was failing everyone. I stopped sleeping entirely. Maybe an hour or two a night, then I would wake up with my heart racing, panicking about money or the lawsuit or losing everything. I lost more weight. My clothes hung off me. I had constant headaches. Phil suggested I see a therapist, but I could not afford therapy. I was drowning in legal bills. My parents stopped pretending to be civil at all. Gerald mocked me openly. "Look at you," he would say. "You thought you were so successful, running your little car shop, playing adult, but you are nothing. You are weak, just like you always were." Diane would nod along, adding her own critiques. "Your girlfriend left because she saw who you really are. No woman wants a man who cannot even stand up to his own parents." They invited people over. Church friends they had made, neighbors who believed their story. They hosted dinners at my house, using my food, my dishes. I would come home to find strangers in my living room, drinking my beer, eating my groceries. Diane would introduce me like I was the problem child. "This is our son Rich. He is going through a difficult time right now. Please excuse him if he seems unfriendly." I felt like I was going insane, like reality had inverted, and I was the villain in a story where I should have been the victim. I started spending more time at the shop, even sleeping there most nights. It was easier than going home. Then Carlos called. Carlos Mendoza was a private investigator I had hired 2 weeks earlier, spending money I could not afford but desperately needed. Phil had suggested it. "If we are going to fight their lawsuit, we need dirt on them. We need to prove they are not the victims they claim to be." Carlos had connections in Europe, contacts who could dig into records. I gave him everything I knew: the hospital in Zurich, Emma's name, and approximate dates, my parents' names. Carlos said he would see what he could find. When he called, his voice was careful. "Rich, I found some things. I think you need to come to my office." I drove to his office in the next town over, a small space above a Vietnamese restaurant. Carlos was in his 50s, former military, with a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated. He had a file folder on his desk. He pushed it toward me. "I need to show you Emma's death certificate first," he said. I opened the folder. The document was in German and English. Official Swiss records. Emma had died on March 14th, 7 years ago. Not 3 months ago, like my parents had claimed. 7 years. I stared at the date, my brain struggling to process it. But they said 3 months. They said she just died. "They lied," Carlos said flatly. "She died when she was 13 years old. 7 years ago." "What were they doing for 7 years?" I asked. "That is where it gets interesting," Carlos said. He pulled out more documents: bank records, apartment leases, photographs. "Your father was involved with a woman named Heidi Bachmann, 26 years old, Swiss national. This started about a year after Emma died. He showed me photos, surveillance-style images. My father with a young blonde woman, laughing, kissing, holding hands on a street in what looked like Zurich. Your mother knew," Carlos continued. "She was complicit. Heidi's father, Klaus Bachmann, is a wealthy businessman, real estate developer. He was giving your parents money, supporting them. Not for Emma's care, obviously. Emma was already dead. But they were telling him they needed funds for ongoing medical expenses, debts from treatment. They were running a long-term con. I felt sick. How long did this last?" "About 6 years, Carlos said. Then Klaus found out your father was married. Heidi had been telling her father that Gerald was a widower. When Klaus discovered the truth, he cut them off completely, threw them out. That was about 8 months ago. Your parents burned through whatever money they had left, got evicted from their apartment in Zurich. That is when they decided to come back to the States and find you. They did not come back because they had nowhere to go," I said slowly. "They came back to run the same con on me." Carlos nodded. "They abandoned you twice. Once for Emma's treatment. That part was real. But then they stayed in Switzerland after she died because they had a good thing going with Klaus Bachmann's money. They only came back when that dried up. You were always their backup plan. I sat there in Carlos's office, staring at the photographs of my father with a woman younger than me, and something inside me changed. The grief, the guilt, the confusion, all of it burned away. What remained was pure, cold rage. I drove back to my shop and sat in my truck in the parking lot. I screamed, loud and long until my throat was raw and my voice gave out. I hit the steering wheel until my hands hurt. Then I sat in the silence, breathing hard, and felt something settle inside me. I was done being the victim. I was done letting them destroy me. They had lied about Emma. They had stolen from me. They had manipulated and gaslit me for months. And they were not going to win. I called Phil. I have evidence, I said. A lot of it. We are going to destroy them in court. But I want more than that. I want justice. I want everyone to know what they did. Phil's voice was cautious. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves they have been running cons for years. Identity fraud, financial fraud. They took donations for Emma's care and spent them on my father's mistress. They lied about when she died. All of it documented. Send me everything, Phil said. And Rich. I am glad you are finally fighting back. That night, I went home for the first time in days. My parents were in the living room, watching television on my couch, drinking my beer. I walked past them without a word, went to my room, and started planning. Not just how to win the lawsuit, but how to make sure they could never hurt anyone again. I spent the next 3 weeks building my case with the same focus I used to rebuild engines. Methodical, precise, leaving nothing to chance. Phil and I met almost daily, going through every document Carlos had provided. We organized everything into a timeline. Emma's actual death date. The start of Gerald's relationship with Heidi. The financial records showing money flowing from Klaus Bachmann. The proof that my parents had continued soliciting donations for Emma's care, years after she died. That last part was particularly damning. Carlos had tracked down several churches and charity organizations in the American Midwest that had sent money to my parents over the years. Prayer groups that had been told Emma was still fighting, still in treatment, still needing support. One church in Kentucky had sent $4,000 over 3 years. A fundraising page on a Christian crowdfunding site had collected nearly $30,000. None of those donors had been told Emma died. My parents had continued collecting money in her name, long after she was buried. Phil's eyes had lit up when he saw that evidence. This is not just lying to you. This is charity fraud on a massive scale. We are talking federal crimes here. But I did not just want to win the lawsuit. I wanted the truth to be public. I reached out to Tracy Whitmore, an investigative journalist who worked for the regional newspaper that covered several counties. She had done a series on elder abuse the previous year that won her some kind of award. I sent her an email with a brief outline of my story and asked if she would be interested in covering it. She called me within 2 hours. This is the kind of story that needs to be told, she said. Parents who claim to be victims of elder abuse, but are actually the abusers themselves. Can I interview you? I told her everything. The abandonment, the manipulation, the lawsuits, the evidence we had uncovered. She took notes and said she wanted to verify everything independently before publishing. I gave her Carlos's contact information and permission to talk to Phil. I also reached out to Jenna. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. Rich. I need to show you something, I said. Can I come over? She hesitated, then agreed. I drove to her sister's apartment where she had been staying and showed her everything. The death certificate, the photos of Gerald and Heidi, the financial records, the evidence of the fraud. She sat on the couch, going through page after page, her expression shifting from shock to anger to something that looked like pride. You found all this? She asked. With help, I said. But yes, I am fighting back. Finally, she reached for my hand. I am sorry I left. I should have stayed. No, I said. You were right to go. I needed to hit bottom before I could start climbing back up, but I am climbing now, and I could use your help." She squeezed my hand. "What do you need?" "Come to the hearing," I said. "Be there. I need to know someone is on my side." She nodded. "I will be there." I also reached out to Danny and asked him to testify about my parents' behavior at the shop, the way they had snooped through my office, the things Gerald had said. Danny agreed immediately. "Whatever you need, boss." Phil prepared a devastating cross-examination. He rehearsed it with me, playing the role of Gerald and Diane, making me practice staying calm and factual. "Do not get emotional," he coached. "Let the evidence speak. You are not there to vent. You are there to prove they are liars and frauds." The court date arrived on a cold January morning. I wore the only suit I owned, a navy blue one I had bought for Curtis's retirement party years ago. Phil met me at the courthouse steps. He had a wheeled briefcase full of documents. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I will ever be," I said. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a handful of benches for observers. Some people from town were there. I recognized a few faces. Mrs. Patterson from across the street. Helen, the pastor's wife, from Street Marks. They were there to support my parents, I assumed. Then I saw Jenna slip into the back row. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod. Across the aisle, my parents sat with Patricia Vance, their pro bono lawyer. Diane was dressed in a floral dress that made her look grandmotherly and harmless. Gerald wore khakis and a cardigan. They looked like the victims they claimed to be. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s named Judge Carolyn Foster. She had a reputation for being fair, but no nonsense. She reviewed the case file, then looked up at both parties. "This is a hearing regarding allegations of elder financial abuse and unlawful eviction. Miss Vance, your clients are the plaintiffs. You may begin." Patricia Vance stood and delivered her opening statement. She painted a picture of two grieving parents who had sacrificed everything for their dying daughter, only to return home and be rejected by their son. She talked about how Gerald and Diane had nowhere to go, how they had turned to their only remaining child for help, and how I had responded with cruelty. She described alleged threats, financial manipulation, attempts to force them out illegally. It was a compelling narrative. If I had not lived through the reality, I might have believed it myself. Then it was Phil's turn. He stood slowly, deliberately. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a case about elder abuse. This is a case about fraud, manipulation, and exploitation. The plaintiffs have lied to this court, to their son, and to countless others over the course of many years. We intend to prove that not only are their claims baseless, but that they themselves are guilty of the very abuse they claim to have suffered." Patricia objected, but Judge Foster overruled her. "I will hear the evidence." The hearing lasted 4 hours. Patricia called my parents to the stand. Diane testified tearfully about watching Emma die, about coming home with nothing, about my cold rejection. Gerald talked about how he had tried to reconnect with me, how I had threatened them, how I had tried to steal their belongings and throw them out. Then Phil began his cross-examination. He started gently, asking basic questions. "When did Emma die, Mrs. Donovan?" Diane answered, 3 months ago, her voice breaking. Phil nodded sympathetically. "And you came back to the United States shortly after?" "Yes," Diane said. Phil pulled out Emma's death certificate. "Your Honor, I would like to enter this into evidence. According to Swiss hospital records, Emma Donovan died 7 years ago. Not 3 months ago. 7 years." The courtroom went silent. Diane's face went white. "That is not. I mean, she died later. They have the dates wrong." Phil pulled out more documents. Hospital records, burial permits, all dated 7 years ago. "So you lied about when your daughter died. Why would you do that?" Diane could not answer. She just sat there, opening and closing her mouth. Phil turned to Gerald. "Mr. Donovan, Can you explain why you and your wife remained in Switzerland for 6 years after your daughter's death? What were you doing there? We were. Gerald started, then stopped. We had obligations, debts to settle. Is that why you were living with a woman named Heidi Bachmann? Phil pulled out the photographs. Is that why you were accepting money from her father under false pretenses, claiming you needed it for medical expenses for a daughter who was already dead? The gallery gasped. I saw Helen cover her mouth with her hand. Mrs. Patterson looked shocked. My parents' carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. Phil continued, methodical and relentless. He presented evidence of the charity fraud. Showed emails from churches asking about Emma's progress, my parents responding with lies about her condition and treatment. Showed bank deposits from donors months and years after Emma had died. He entered the credit card applications into evidence, proving they had tried to steal my identity. He presented Danny as a witness, who testified about finding my parents going through my office. By the time Phil finished, my parents looked like what they were: con artists, frauds, abusers posing as victims. Patricia tried to salvage the case, arguing that even if some details were incorrect, her clients still deserved compassion and support. But Judge Foster cut her off. Miss Vance, your clients lied to you, to this court, and apparently to everyone they have encountered. I have serious concerns about the validity of any claim they have made. Then Gerald made his fatal mistake. Phil called him back to the stand for one final question. Mr. Donovan, in your own words, why did you return to Ohio and seek out your son? Gerald's temper, which he had been controlling all day, finally snapped. He leaned forward, his face red. Because Emma was dead and we needed money. Because we spent 10 years taking care of his sister and he owed us. We deserved that money we collected. Emma did not need it anymore. She was dead. And this ungrateful brat, he pointed at me, should be thanking us for leaving him alone, instead of burdening him with a sick sister. He got to have a normal life, because we took her away. He owes us everything. The courtroom erupted. People were talking, gasping. Judge Foster slammed her gavel. Mr. Donovan, sit down. Patricia put her face in her hands. Diane was crying, but not the sympathetic kind. The desperate, caught kind. Judge Foster looked disgusted. I have heard enough. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. The restraining order request is denied. The eviction is approved with immediate enforcement. Mr. Donovan, Mrs. Donovan, you have 24 hours to vacate your son's property. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented today regarding charity fraud, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution. She slammed the gavel again. We are adjourned. I sat there, stunned. Phil put his hand on my shoulder. We won. My parents were escorted out by the bailiff. They did not look at me. The people in the gallery were talking amongst themselves, looking at me with new eyes. Not judgment, sympathy, understanding. Jenna came down from the back row and hugged me tightly. I am so proud of you. Tracy Whitmore was waiting outside the courtroom. She had been given permission to attend. Can I interview you now? She asked. Yes, I said. Tell the story. All of it. The sheriff's deputies supervised the eviction the next day. I stood on my front lawn, watching as my parents packed their belongings into a borrowed van. They did not speak to me. Diane cried quietly. Gerald's face was hard and angry. They had nowhere to go except a homeless shelter in Columbus, an hour away. I felt nothing watching them leave. No satisfaction, no guilt. Just emptiness. The van pulled away, and I walked back into my house. It felt strange, too quiet, violated somehow. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, washing sheets, scrubbing surfaces, trying to erase any trace of them. Tracy's article published 3 days later. The headline read, Local Son exposes parents' decade of deception and charity fraud. She had verified everything independently, interviewed sources, talked to the churches and donors who had been defrauded. The article was thorough, factual, and damning. It went viral locally, then regionally, then got picked up by state news outlets. My phone rang constantly. Customers calling to apologize. Neighbors saying they were sorry for believing the lies. Mrs. Patterson brought over a casserole and actually cried on my doorstep, apologizing for judging me. The pastor from Street Marks called to offer his support and apologize for his wife giving me the cold shoulder. Business at the shop rebounded within a week. Then exceeded its previous levels, as people actively wanted to support me. The district attorney pursued criminal charges. My parents were offered a plea deal to avoid trial. They pleaded guilty to reduced charges of wire fraud and filing false legal claims. They were sentenced to 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service each, and mandatory restitution. The judge ordered them to repay the defrauded donors, to be garnished from any wages they earned for the rest of their lives. They left Ohio entirely. I heard through the grapevine they moved to Arizona, trying to escape the shame and attention. I did not care where they went. They were out of my life, and that was all that mattered. Jenna moved back in within 2 weeks. She apologized for leaving, but I told her she had nothing to apologize for. "You were right," I said. "I needed to hit bottom to find the strength to fight. Thank you for coming back." We went to therapy together. I finally had the time and resources to address the trauma of being abandoned at 18, of building a life from nothing, of being exploited and manipulated. The therapist helped me understand that family is a choice, not an obligation. That I did not owe my parents anything simply because they gave birth to me. That standing up for myself was not cruelty. It was survival. Danny returned to full-time hours with a raise. Business was booming. I hired 2 more mechanics to handle the increased work. I moved the shop to a bigger location on Main Street, with better equipment and more bays. Curtis called from Florida to congratulate me, his voice filled with pride. I bought a bigger house in a nicer neighborhood, 3 bedrooms, a garage, a backyard. Jenna and I furnished it together, choosing everything ourselves. It felt like a fresh start. About 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Switzerland. It was from a woman named Claudia Steiner. She explained that she had been Emma's primary nurse during her final years. She had seen the news articles about my parents and felt compelled to reach out. Enclosed with the letter were photographs. Emma at 10, 11, 12, 13, smiling despite her illness, drawing pictures, playing with therapy dogs. There were also letters. Letters Emma had written to me over the years. Letters my parents had never sent. "Dear Rich," one of them read, "I miss you. I wish you could come visit. The doctors say I am doing better. I told them about you, about how you used to let me ride on your shoulders when I was little. I hope I get to see you again soon. I drew you a picture. It is of our old house. Do you remember it? I love you. Emma." I sat on my living room floor and cried for the first time since this whole nightmare started. Not for my parents, for Emma, for the little sister I barely knew, for the relationship we should have had but never got the chance to build. Claudia's letter explained that Emma had asked about me constantly. She had wanted to see me. She had begged my parents to bring me to visit or to take her home. They had always made excuses. Treatment protocols, infection risks, money for plane tickets. But Claudia suspected the truth. They wanted to keep Emma isolated, keep the narrative under their control. If I had visited, I might have asked questions. I might have discovered their schemes. I wrote back to Claudia, thanking her for preserving Emma's memory, for caring about her when our parents saw her only as a tool for manipulation. Claudia sent more pictures, more stories. I learned about the sweet, brave girl my sister had been. I used some of my business profits to establish a small scholarship fund, the Emma Memorial Scholarship for children in families dealing with serious illness. I partnered with local schools to identify kids whose lives were being disrupted by medical crises in their families, kids who might otherwise fall through the cracks like I had. It gave me purpose beyond just building a business. It turned my pain into something meaningful. I reconnected with Uncle Jerry. He had gotten sober 2 years earlier after a health scare. We met for coffee, and he apologized for not being there for me when I was 18. "I was a mess," he said. "I could barely take care of myself. I am sorry you got stuck with me." I told him I understood. He had done the best he could. We started having breakfast together every Sunday. He became something like the father figure I had never had. A year after the trial, I proposed to Jenna. We were on a weekend trip to Lake Erie, walking on the beach at sunset. I did not have a fancy speech planned. I just knew that she had stood by me through the worst time of my life, that she had challenged me when I needed it, and supported me when I needed that instead. She was my partner in every sense of the word. She said yes. We got married at a small ceremony in Curtis's backyard in Florida. He insisted, saying he wanted to be there to see the kid he trained finally get his happy ending. Danny was my best man. Jerry walked Jenna down the aisle since her father had passed away years before. It was small and simple and perfect. About 18 months after the trial, I received one final letter from my mother. No return address, just a single page. It was not an apology. It was complaints about how hard their life was, how the probation was unfair, how the restitution was impossible to pay, how they had lost everything because of my selfishness. The final paragraph asked if I could let bygones be bygones and send them some money to help them get back on their feet. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice. Then I took out a piece of paper and wrote a single sentence. "You made your choices. Live with them." I mailed it and never heard from them again. Life moved forward. Jenna and I settled into our marriage. The business continued to grow. I opened a second location in the next town over, making Danny the manager of the original shop. We talked about starting a family, maybe adopting, giving a home to a kid who needed one the way I had needed one at 18. I realized something important through all of this. Biology does not make a family. Choice does. Commitment does. The people who stayed, who fought for me, who believed in me when I could not believe in myself, they were my real family. Curtis, who taught me a trade and treated me like a son. Danny, who stood by me when my business was failing. Jenna, who challenged me to fight back. Jerry, who got sober and became a real uncle. Claudia, in Switzerland, who preserved my sister's memory. Even Tracy, the journalist who helped me tell the truth. I learned that standing up for yourself is not cruelty. It is self-preservation. That guilt can be weaponized by manipulative people, but recognizing it breaks its power. That success, built from nothing, is more valuable than anything handed to you. That you cannot choose your blood relatives, but you can choose who gets access to your life. The trauma of being abandoned at 18, of being exploited and manipulated, did not disappear. I still had bad days, days when I questioned my worth or my choices. But therapy helped. Jenna helped. Building something meaningful helped. One morning, about 2 years after everything ended, I stood in my shop watching Danny train a new young mechanic named Tyler. Tyler was 19, living on his own, working his way through community college. He reminded me of myself at that age. Hungry, determined, trying to build something from nothing. I made a mental note to mentor him the way Curtis had mentored me. Jenna stopped by with coffee, the way she did most mornings now. She kissed me goodbye before heading to work. A customer thanked me for fixing her car quickly and cheaply because she knew she was struggling financially. Her kid gave me a picture she had drawn of her family's car. I taped it to the wall in my office, right next to one of Emma's drawings that Claudia had sent me. I looked around at the life I had built. Not despite what my parents had done to me. Not because of it, just independent of it entirely. I was no longer defined by what they took from me. I was defined by what I created for myself. I was whole. I was healed. I was free. Some people will only ever see you as what you can give them. The moment you stop giving, they will show you who they really are. And that is when you will discover who you really are too. I discovered I was stronger than I ever knew. I did not need them to become the man I was meant to be. I did that on my own. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to cut ties with family members who were toxic or manipulative? How did you find the strength to do it? And how did you rebuild your life afterward? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who is struggling with a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about overcoming hardship and finding strength. And share this video with anyone who might need to hear it. Someone out there is facing their own toxic family situation and feeling alone. Let them know they are not. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brought you some comfort, some strength, or at least the knowledge that it is possible to survive even the worst betrayals and come out stronger on the other side. Take care of yourselves. Protect your peace. And remember, you deserve people in your life who choose you every day, not just when it is convenient for them.